So now that you've set up your project in Android Studio, in this video, we're going to look at how to actually build out our first screen for our app. So if you remember, our goal for this app is to build a simple to-do app. Users should be able to see a list of task items. They should be able to enter a task item, and there should be a button that lets them actually add that task to the list of already originally existing tasks. So this video, we're going to focus on how to build out this whole screen of UI inside our XML file. So we're going to be adding a button to our layout, adding an editable text field to our layout, and then finally adding that list of items to our layout that we can then start working off with. Alright, so now let's go inside Android Studio and start building out our first screen. So now I'm back inside my Android Studio with my project open up, just as we have left it off before when we first created the project. The only file we're going to be working with in this specific video is going to be the XML file where we do all the layouts. The Kotlin file will come a little later, so let's close that out for now. So inside our XML file, you'll notice that whenever you're looking at the XML file, there's 3 different options on how you can view it. You can view just the code of the file. You could do a split design where you see the code and a preview of what the screen will look like based on what you've inputted into the XML file, or you could just look at the design tab. The design tab is nice because you can drag and drop views that you need, and then the code will automatically be written for you. So let's take a look at what that means. So right now in our code we have a text view that simply displays the hello world text. In our design, we can see that this text field is also available here. If in our design tab we click on this hello world and then we delete it, back in our code we can see that code has also been deleted. If you want to work in the split mode, that's also a good choice to see how the code interacts to make the code change whenever you do something in the design. But let's start by adding the buttons and the views we need in order to build out our first screen. So if you remember, we need to build out a list of items that the user can see on top. There's going to be an editable text field that the user is going to need on the bottom here. And then there needs to be a button where the user can actually click on the button to add that specific item. So let's start by adding a button. Back in the palette here on the left-hand side, there's a lot of different common views that you can just simply drag and drop into this layout editor here. So I'm going to start by dragging a button. So I'm going to click on the button, and I'm literally just going to drag it and drop it right here. And you'll see that there are some dots here that are not filled in, and there are some dots that are filled in. So the layout we're working with here is something called a constraint layout. So I'm going back to the code tab. You'll see that every view is now surrounded by this constraint layout. What that means is that we're basically laying out each view with a certain constraint on where this specific view should be. So for example, whenever I'm talking about views, anything that we add inside this layout file is going to be a view. So this button itself is a view, and we need to tell this button how it needs to be laid out in relative to the screen. So if we go back to the design, if I want this button to be on the bottom right-hand corner, I need to drag this bottom dot all the way to the bottom so that it's filled in. And then I need to drag this right dot all the way to the right so that's filled in. Once we go back to the code, we can see that now we have 2 specific line items. One says constrain the bottom of this view to the bottom of a parent, which basically means match the bottom of this view to the bottom of the screen. Whenever we talk about parent, in this specific case, the parent is going to be the screen. Then we say, okay, constrain the end of this view. End is another way to say the right of. So end is similar to right. So you could think of this saying constrain the right of this view to the right of the screen. The parent, again, is similar to screen. So here we're saying, okay, 1, make sure this bottom is aligned to the bottom of the screen, and 2, make sure this button is aligned to the right of the screen. The other thing we can change right now is the text in the button just says button, but we want this text we want this specific button to let the user add an item to a list. So a more appropriate text for this button might be add. That way the user has a better idea of what this button is supposed to do. Okay, so now that we have this button, let's go back to the design tab. Another thing we want to add is something to actually let the user type into a field, right? To let them bring the keyboard up on their phone and type into this field so that they can put in their text to add to the list of items that they need in their to-do list. So in order to do that, we're going to go into the text category on the left-hand side here, look for the plain text view. And again, just like what we did with the button, drag and drop it to the screen here. And again, we need to set some constraints for this specific view so that it doesn't jump around on the screen and it knows where on the screen it belongs. So this specific view, I think we want to align it to the bottom left. So we're going to drag this dot to the left here. I'm going to drag this dot on the bottom down here. And going back to the code, just to make sure we have everything aligned, we want to make sure that you have these specific lines. One that says, hey, make sure this view is aligned to the bottom of the screen. And 2, make sure this view is aligned to the left of the screen. So constraint start is similar to, you could think of constraint start as being constraint left. So this line is saying constrain this view to the left of the screen. We don't want any text in here for now. So I'm going to go ahead and take out this line of code that says name. We don't specifically need to know what kind of input type this is, so I'm going to take that out as well. So in the end, I'm only going to be left with these 5 lines. So one thing I do want to change is right now you'll realize that this edit text field that lets the user input another task is very tiny. I want to make sure that this stretches out so that it's as wide as I can take up to where this add button is. So in order to do that, this is kind of tricky, but we're going to have to actually make the width of this edit text 0 dp. This means don't lay out the specific view yet until you know how much space you can take out. And then I'm going to drag the right dot here for this edit text view to this add button on the right so that they connect. So what that did was it added this specific line here where it says, okay, make sure the right of this edit text view is constrained to the left of this button here. And that just makes it so that this specific field where the user can type text in takes up as much space as it can without running into this button field. So this is the end of what my text looks like, what my layout looks like so far. I have a button, the one on the bottom right here, and then I have an edit text field where the user can actually input a task item. And we could tell the user, give a user a better hint of what this specific text field is supposed to do by adding an attribute called Android hint. An Android hint, whenever you give this a specific task, it'll add this really cool looking gray text down here. And this, as you'll see a little bit later, is a text that will display in gray. But if the user clicks on this specific edit text field, this text will go away. So it's just a prompt to tell the user, hey, this is what you should be typing into this edit text field. All right, it doesn't look too great so far. I'm actually going to add some margins because you can see this button here. It's really crammed to the edge of the screen here. So I'm going to add some margins for these views. And the way I do that is by typing Android. And I'm going to give it a layout margin attribute. And I'm going to give it something like 10 dp and just see how it looks like. So 10 dp looks okay. I'm going to add the same margin for my edit text view down here. So now things are looking a little less crammed and they're not running into the side of the screen as much. The last thing we need to add, if you remember, is actually the list of items that will display a list of all the different tasks. So I'm going to go back to the design tab and I'm going to go into the common category, and the thing we're looking for is going to be something called the recycler view. So recycler view is how Android displays list of items that are really similar to each other. And recycler view might seem like a really complicated concept as we start implementing in the next video, but we're going to be working with recycler views for the first 6 weeks of the course, and you're going to get really familiar with it. So it's okay if it doesn't seem very easy to understand for now. But let's start by dragging this recycler view over into our screen here. And you'll see it takes up just as much space as we want. One thing I'm going to add is on the top, I want to make sure I drag this dot all the way to the top so it's filled in. Make sure dot on the top is filled in. Make sure dot on the left is filled in by dragging it to the left. And similar to the right, make sure the right dot is filled in. Drag the dot there. Make sure it's filled in. There we go. And I'm not going to do anything with the bottom dot for now, but let's go ahead and go into the code and see what we've done. So inside the code, you'll see that we've added this block of code where a recycler view was added. And this is where we're going to be displaying a list of items. The layout width has already been written for us, but I'm going to change this layout width to be match parent. Match parent just means I want this recycler view or this list of items to take up as much space on the width side as the screen. So I want this to be as wide as the screen itself. The height, again, I kind of want this recycler view to take up as much space as it can without running into these two views down here. So I'm going to make this 0 dp for now, and then add a constraint so it knows how big to make itself. So you realize once I added 0 dp, it kind of shrunk. But now one thing we could do is we could drag this dot down here for the recycler view. So in the recycler view, in this dot, the bottom dot here, I'm going to drag it and connect it to the top dot in the edit text field we had earlier. So what that means is I'm telling this recycler view, hey, you could take up as much space as a screen as long as you don't run over this edit text field down here. And when we drag those dots, what it did was it added this specific line here. So constrain the bottom of this recycler view to the top of this edit text field. One thing I don't quite like here is you'll realize for every view we've added, so for this button, for this edit text, and for this recycler view, they automatically added an ID for us. This is how we're going to identify this specific view later. So basically we're giving this view a name that we can use later. So this button was given a name of button. This edit text, I'm going to give it a better name. So I'm going to call it, let's see, why don't we call it add task field. And you'll see once I change the ID up here, there's red that displays down here. Whenever you see red in Android Studio, that means there's an error and you need to fix it. And the specific error here is we were telling this recycler view that we wanted it to be constrained to the top of this text field here. And this text field had a name that was previously this, but then now we changed it. So now it doesn't know how to constrain itself anymore. So we need to edit this as well. And then the red goes away, and now the recycler view again knows how to lay out itself. So all we've done so far in this video is we've added this button inside our layout file. We've added this text field that the user can input text in, and then we've added a recycler view. We can't quite run our app yet. I guess we could run an app actually. Let's run our app and see what it looks like so far, just to make sure nothing is broken and we could still do stuff. Alright, so I'm going to stop my original app, and then I'm going to run it again on my emulator and see what our app looks like. And hopefully, when you run your app, it'll look similar to what I have on my app so far. Great, so it looks like we don't see a list of items yet because we haven't actually added any items, but we do have this field down here that says add a task, which we could click into. The keyboard comes up, and now we can start adding tasks, which is pretty cool. And then again, you could also click the add button once we actually build out the logic to actually add tests. But for now, we don't quite have that yet. So in our next video, we're actually going to look at how to implement displaying a list of items inside the recycle view. Because while we do have this kind of frame to hold all these different items, right now it's not hooked up to anything to actually display a list of items. So hopefully at this point when you run an app, you can at least see a button down here, a place where the user can tap to add some of their own input. And then in the next video, we're actually going to start adding items to our list so our app looks a little bit more interesting.